Welcome, everybody. I'm Doug Chilcott, Creative Director of TED Partnerships. Welcome to our TED Remotes panel here at TED 2014. We actually have people today from who have actually ventured far beyond where most people even dare to travel. Outer space, the deep sea, the North Pole, Antarctica, Mount Everest. We're going to have a quick conversation today about what that experience is like to inhabit and experience remote locations. I'll just introduce the panel here today. To my left is Chris Hadfield, astronaut, Sylvia Earle, oceanographer, Ben Saunders, an explorer, and joining us via Skype, remote, we have Roz Savage, who rode solo across the Pacific Ocean, former TED speaker. We have Darren McGann, who actually has staged a TEDx event in Antarctica, of all places. And we have Mark Wood, who's actually an explorer, who's actually joining us. I think his bike is behind him. He's riding a bike in New Zealand as we speak. So welcome, all of you.
Thank you very much.
What surprised you most about when you first encountered these spaces? When we first went to outer space, what surprised you, I guess, is the question.
I think probably what surprised me the most was how rapidly the confines of your perspectives change. And the first thing you look for is the familiar when you're in a really unfamiliar place, like orbiting the world. And in fact, it's so important to you that you want to grab other people and point it out to them. You want to go, hey, look at that. I was there once. And you can't help but do that. But fairly shortly, you start to, your myopia or your narrowness of field of view tends to widen. And there's an evolution of perspective that becomes the bedrock of your thought, which is that all of it is connected when you get to see it repeatedly just from a new perspective. And for me, that was pretty fundamental in the necessity to change your perspective if you truly want to understand something.
Great. Sylvia, take us to the deep sea, your first trip.
From the first time as a kid, putting a face mask on and realizing that the creatures there are actually curious about me. Fish have faces. Fish are interested, not just in you as something to eat, maybe some of them are, but it's just the wonder of, you can take a glass of salt water from the ocean. It looks perfectly clear, but if you really look at it, you can see the history of life on Earth.
Certainly, that's great.
It's in the small creatures
right.
that are sharing space with us on this little blue speck in the universe.
Wonderful. Actually, I want to jump to Skype. Roz, when you're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, obviously you were prepared for isolation, but what surprised you most about that experience?
Well, I've actually rowed across 3 oceans, and I think what first surprised me was how quickly I adapted to a new normal. I'd spent most of my adult life working in an office cubicle, so suddenly to be alone out on the ocean in a 23-foot rowboat in some pretty big waves was absolutely terrifying to start off with. And the first couple of weeks, I'd just be, at night times especially, just curled up in my bunk, just quaking with fear. But after a while, you kind of get tired of being scared. And I think it's actually incredibly empowering to realize just how capable we are of coping with a new reality.
Totally. I'll come back to Ben.
I'd echo what Roz said. I'm always astounded by how quickly and how readily we humans adapt to extreme climates and to living extreme. I also, the one thing that surprised me about Antarctica, even though I'd been dreaming of going there for years, decades, and reading about it, studying it, was in a sense, the sensory deprivation. A lot of the imagery we see of Antarctica, a lot of the film, a lot of the footage, a lot of the photographs, a lot of the paintings of stunning mountain ranges and beautiful scenery around the coast, the peninsula. But most of Antarctica is flat plateau, featureless, 360-degree, flat white horizon. And we had a lot of bad weather as well. We had a lot of whiteout. So we spent an awful lot of time traveling into almost zero visibility. So I hadn't expected that, and the in a sense, the sort of mental strain that came with that. Totally. I don't know if it's the same in zero gravity, but it's a peculiar, when you can't tell the difference between the sky and the ground, the snow, it was very disorientating.
Actually, Mark, I wanted to bring you in. I think when people think about remote places, they think they're quiet. I think it's just, we're convinced that our cultures are so loud, and when you go somewhere else, they must be quiet. Your experience is climbing Everest, exploring the poles. I'm just curious if you could reflect on that question. Is it quiet or is it just a different kind of noise?
You know, as the guys have said already, you know, when you're thrown into that situation, there's only one way of getting through it, and that's by accepting where you are, your skill sets, and how you move forward. And it is actually becomes a way of life, it becomes an existence of your own time. Rather than an expedition, it's actually I look at it as what I'm doing at that particular time, and it takes the stress off of actually being on an expedition, if that makes sense at all.
Definitely. Chris, I want to come back to you. I'm just wondering, we talked about first impressions. What's more difficult, adapting to being in space or adapting to coming back from space? Or are they just totally different and equally difficult?
I had a big head start of adaptation to life on Earth. You know, I'd been on Earth for decades and decades before I went to space. And so when you get to weightlessness, you are somewhat useful in a couple days, but you're not truly elegant in space for about a month, where you unconsciously, gracefully move places. It takes about a month. When you return to Earth, it's returning to something with which you have a deep bedrock familiarity already. I think if you were born in space and you were raised there and then you came to Earth, it would be a phenomenally difficult adaptation to come to Earth,
right,
to try and live under the endless oppression of gravity for the first time. So, but when I returned to Earth, within a few days, my body felt normal again, even after half a year of going around the sun.
I go back to the question: is it quiet in space?
It's serene in space. It's interesting. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, when they guessed what it would be like out on a spacewalk, I thought it was brilliant that they envisioned that the primary sound stimulation would be your own breathing. And there's a real comfort in that, in that the primary thing that you hear is the fact that you're alive the whole time, which is evidenced by the intake and outtake of breath, amplified through your microphone, and just listening to yourself breathing this little tiny bubble of air that you've brought with you, like a goldfish that brought its own bowl with it.
Right.
Out there to see something that's brand new in the human perspective. But the silence is absolute. You can bang with all your might on a piece of aluminum in front of you, and there's not a sound unless you touch your helmet to it to hear the echoing ring. It's a very, very different place to be.
Actually, another part of remoteness is actually not being connected to people. Roz, I want to get back to you. Just the idea of communication when you're actually in a place that's so far away from the rest of the world. Your experience, case in point. I don't know how much contact you actually were having, but is that isolation as bad as the fear of the waves, just having no human connection?
My guilty secret is that I actually enjoyed the isolation and the solitude. The last 24 days on the Atlantic Ocean, my one and only satellite phone broke, which was absolutely terrible for my poor mother, but was actually quite blissful for me. It was just, I think, a real privilege to be completely cut off from this perpetual assault on our senses by advertising and music and TV and voices, and to just be out there alone in this wilderness, really just feeling like another sea creature, although not a very well adapted one in my case. So I feel that it is a privilege. And you think back a few thousand years, I think we used to have a lot more solitude and me time in our lives when we could actually step back and have time to think about things. And something that really strikes me when I come back to dry land is just the busyness of everybody. It's like we're in this kind of frenzy, running around, doing all these things, mostly around stuff. We're earning money to buy stuff, we're buying it, we're moving it, we're selling it. There's so much related stuff going on. Yeah. And being alone on the ocean is a really wonderful opportunity just to kind of get off that treadmill for a little while.
Yeah. Actually, Darren, I want to bring you in for a second. Obviously, you're taking a remote place and actually bringing TED to it, which is actually the exact opposite of what most of us do in that situation. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges of actually staging a TEDx event in Antarctica?
Yes. Well, having a TEDx event in Antarctica definitely has its own challenges. First off, whenever you're in Antarctica, the weather rules the day. We had a place and a date and a time for when we wanted to have our event, but we really didn't have a good idea that it would happen until about 24 hours in advance because the weather changes. So once we did get set up on the ice, one of the challenges was the lack of electricity. And I knew that since I wanted to have the first TED event down in Antarctica, I wanted to do it responsibly and demonstrate to all the other organizers of TED around the world that it can be done on solar, renewable energy. Mm-hmm. So 100% of our TED event, when it was on the ice, was hosted by the sun. And we charged all the AV video equipment, the microphones, everything was right there. And Antarctica, as your panel probably knows, it's twice the size of Australia. It's got about 97% of the world's ice and about 70% of the world's fresh water. It's extremely important to the planet. And I wanted to demonstrate that you can have this event and be the most environmentally sensitive as you can, because it is a true gem for the entire world.
Great, thank you. So in terms of, I'm just kind of curious, what's your next adventure that you have planned?
Yeah, I think there's a perspective that I peaked, which is so far from the truth. Okay. It's comical to me, as if my life was somehow this long, flat plane of boredom, and then suddenly I was in space and things were interesting, and now that I'm back on Earth, it's boring again. And it's sort of the bucket list mentality, in that you walk around in life with an inherently empty bucket, hoping that someday you're going to be able to put something into your bucket that gives you value. And I find that a horrible way to go through life, because number one, it means you're walking through life with an empty bucket most of the time, which is your sense of self-worth. Then two, your bucket's never going to be full. And so if you allow yourself to be judged personally by some of the great events or externally valued events in life, you're setting yourself up for misery, I think. So I got up this morning and had a delicious breakfast, and then I came in and listened to 3 or 4 really interesting talks, and I'm sitting next to 2 people that I would love to sit all day and talk with, and I'm hosting a dinner tonight with 8 people that I haven't met. This is one of the best days of my life.
That's great.
And the fact that I flew in space just gives me a broader base with which hopefully to add something to the conversation. So I don't measure it nearly the way that you might think I would. And I think anybody who does is letting themselves in for a fool's game.
Okay. Sylvia, what's next for you?
Continuation of what I've been aspiring to do most of my life, and that is not only to personally explore the blue part of my home planet, and to develop the technologies, the submarines, the remote systems, living underwater, whatever it takes, so that others can share this view.
Wonderful.
But most importantly, to inspire people to take care of the world. You know, it should be our highest priority, that everything we care about depends on taking care of the systems that take care of us. Okay. You talk about being a goldfish up in space. Well, we're all goldfishes here on Earth. Okay. But we're not taking care of the blue part, especially where most oxygen is generated. And it's getting that message across, that the most important thing we take out of the ocean is our existence.
Ben, just
I'm busy just defrosting at the moment, just recovering, eating a lot. I put on nearly 30 pounds in the last 4 weeks. So, but I'm so glad Chris said what he said, actually, because people, the one question I got asked is, what's next? How are you going to top that? How are you going to? And I think on one level, this was the culmination of more than a decade's ambition and hard work, and you know. But on the other sense, it was crossing our arbitrary finish line, stepping ashore onto Ross Island was the biggest anticlimax of my entire life, and the strangest paradox of this whole trip was that spending that much time with one other guy in a sense in our own version of outer space, Antarctica, high in the Antarctic plateau in early spring. If you take your clothes off, you'll be dead in a few minutes. So we were, in a sense, we were astronauts. We were kind of tethered to the surface, but we were absolutely reliant on each other, and I think it taught me an awful lot about being humble, being compassionate, being kind, and actually didn't teach you an awful lot about these things that we attach so much value to, about glory and status and achievement and
Right.
yeah. So.
All right. Well, actually, we're running out of time. Actually, I want to make sure everybody gets back in time for the theater for the next session. So thank you all for joining us. These actually will be happening all week, and they will be recorded. And actually, will be posted on TED.com later this week. So I invite you to, whether you're watching here or actually watching online, to actually check out additional ones throughout the week. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
And thank you everyone from Skype.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
goodbye.
you. Great to see you. Wish I was there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much.